$3,000? Oh man, this is not a charity auction.
That's all I have, and I'm taking them home.
Veteran couldn't afford to buy back his K9. Then the dog's loyalty made headlines. The German Shepherd's desperate howls echoed through the military surplus warehouse as 66-year-old Michael Bennett watched his life savings of $3,000 being quickly outbid by collectors who saw his K9 partner Rex as nothing more than expensive merchandise. The auctioneer's smug smile made it clear sentiment had no place in serious business. Michael's weathered hands trembled as he clutched the envelope containing every dollar he'd saved in 8 years of retirement. The Vietnam veteran's Purple Heart meant nothing here, nor did the fact that Rex had been his anchor through the darkest nights of PTSD, his reason for living when the world felt too heavy to bear. But what happened next would transform a heartless auction into a viral sensation about loyalty, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds between those who served together. Rex's reaction to seeing Michael would remind everyone present that some connections transcend money status and the cold calculations of commerce. The surplus warehouse in Fort Worth, Texas, buzzed with the controlled chaos of military memorabilia collectors dealers hunting for profitable resales and curiosity seekers drawn by the promise of owning a piece of American military history. Under harsh fluorescent lights, tables displayed everything from vintage uniforms to communications equipment, while larger items like decommissioned vehicles sat in the back lot under the unforgiving October sun. The air was thick with the scent of motor oil, canvas, and metal, the smell of equipment that had served in distant conflicts and was now being sold to the highest bidder. This monthly auction drew serious collectors with deep pockets, men in expensive suits who treated military history as investment opportunities rather than sacred artifacts of service and sacrifice. Michael had learned about loyalty the hard way in the jungles of Vietnam, where survival depended on trust between soldiers and their working dogs. After losing his first K9 partner to a landmine, he'd sworn never to form such a deep bond again. But Rex had been different, a German Shepherd puppy who'd arrived at the military police unit with such intelligence and courage that Michael couldn't help but open his heart again. For 5 years, they'd worked together detecting explosives and protecting fellow soldiers, forming a partnership that transcended the typical handler-dog relationship. Living alone in a cramped apartment on his military pension, Michael had spent 8 years carefully saving every spare dollar for this moment. His ex-wife had left him years ago, unable to cope with his PTSD and nightmares. His adult children lived across the country, calling dutifully on holidays but never visiting. Rex represented the only family Michael had left, the one relationship that had provided unconditional love and understanding during his darkest struggles with depression and survivor's guilt. What made Michael extraordinary wasn't his Purple Heart or his decorated service record. It was his ability to communicate with working dogs in ways that amazed even veteran handlers. He could read their body language, understand their needs, and earn their trust through patience and genuine care. Rex had responded to this gift, becoming not just a working partner, but a companion who could sense Michael's PTSD episodes before they began providing comfort and grounding when the memories threatened to overwhelm him. The auction represented Michael's last chance to reunite with Rex, who had been retired from service and classified as surplus property by military bureaucracy. The cold designation of equipment disposal couldn't diminish what Rex meant to Michael. He was family protector and the anchor that kept him tethered to life when the darkness felt too overwhelming. But as Michael surveyed the other bidders, wealthy collectors with thick wallets and dealers looking for profitable investments, he realized his $3,000 might be woefully inadequate. Rex was a highly trained military working dog with an impressive service record, exactly the kind of animal that could fetch tens of thousands from the right buyer. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Michael failed to buy Rex today, he would lose the only family he had left to strangers who would never understand the depth of their bond. But fate has prepared a lesson in loyalty that will touch the hearts of all present and prove that there are things that cannot be valued in money. Lot 247. Auctioneer Harrison announced with the practiced efficiency of someone who had sold thousands of items without caring about their emotional significance. German Shepherd military working dog, fully trained in explosives detection and patrol work. Excellent health records, impressive service history. Starting bid $2,000. Michael's hand shot up immediately, his voice clear, despite the tremor in his chest. $2,000. Harrison barely glanced at the elderly veteran before acknowledging a bid from a well-dressed collector in the back. "I have $2,500 from the gentleman in the suit." Michael countered without hesitation. $3,000. The words came out stronger than he felt, representing every dollar he'd saved since retirement, every skipped meal and canceled plan to build toward this moment. Harrison's smile was condescending as he took in Michael's worn clothes and obvious nervousness. "Sir, this is a serious auction for serious collectors. Are you certain you can cover that bid?" The public humiliation stung, but Michael stood his ground. "I have the money right here," he said, holding up the envelope containing his life savings. Cash. But even as he spoke, Michael could see other hands rising around the room, and he realized with growing dread that his carefully saved fortune might not be enough. 3,500, called out a dealer from the middle of the crowd, his casual tone making it clear that this was just another business transaction to him. Michael's heart sank as he realized he was already outbid and the auction had barely begun. He watched helplessly as the price climbed beyond his reach. $4,000, $4,500, $5,000. Each bid felt like a nail in the coffin of his hopes, and Harrison's increasingly smug expression showed he was enjoying the old veteran's visible distress. "I'm sorry, old-timer," Harrison said with false sympathy. "Maybe you should stick to the smaller items. We have some nice canteens that might be more in your price range." The laughter from some of the other bidders was like salt in an open wound. Michael felt his face burning with shame and disappointment, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Rex was sitting in his transport kennel just 50 feet away, and Michael couldn't abandon him without a fight. "Going once at 5,000, Harrison announced, clearly eager to move on to the next lot. "Going twice." But before he could complete the sale, something extraordinary happened. Rex, who had been sitting quietly in his kennel throughout the bidding, suddenly caught sight of Michael in the crowd. The change in the dog's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. His ears perked up, his tail began wagging frantically, and he began whining with the desperate urgency of a dog who had found something precious he thought was lost forever. "Rex!" Michael called out, his voice breaking with emotion as he stepped closer to the kennel. "Hey, boy, I'm here." The German Shepherd's response was unlike anything the crowd had ever witnessed. Rex began pawing at the kennel door, his whines becoming more insistent as he tried desperately to reach Michael. When an auction assistant tried to quiet the dog, Rex ignored him completely, his entire focus fixed on the old veteran who had been his partner and protector for so many years. "Sir, please step back," Harrison commanded, clearly annoyed by the disruption to his carefully controlled auction. "You're disturbing the merchandise." But Rex would not be quieted. As Michael was forced to step back, the dog's distress became even more pronounced. He began barking, not the aggressive bark of a guard dog, but the desperate call of family trying to reach each other across an impossible divide. The sound echoed through the warehouse, and every person present could hear the anguish in it. The crowd began to murmur as they witnessed something profound unfolding before their eyes. This wasn't just a transaction anymore, it was a reunion, a story of loyalty that was touching hearts throughout the room. But reality is harsher than expected, and what happens next will prove that sometimes loyalty can melt even the coldest of hearts. Rex's emotional response to seeing Michael had transformed the warehouse atmosphere from routine business to something approaching sacred territory. The German Shepherd's continued distress at being separated from Michael was affecting everyone present. Even the hardened dealers and collectors were shifting uncomfortably as they witnessed the dog's obvious anguish. Harrison tried to maintain control, insisting they needed to complete this sale professionally. But his authority was wavering as the crowd's sympathy clearly favored the old veteran and his desperate canine companion. A woman in the crowd called out, "Let the dog out! Can't you see he knows that man?" Others began echoing her sentiment, and suddenly the auction had become something else entirely, a human drama that was more compelling than any business transaction. Rex's whining grew more desperate, and he began throwing himself against the kennel door with such force that the entire structure shook. The sound of his claws scraping against metal created a soundtrack of desperation that no one in the room could ignore. The highest bidder, a wealthy collector who had been prepared to pay $8,000 for Rex, suddenly looked uncomfortable as all eyes turned to him. "This is just business," he said defensively, but his voice lacked conviction. The crowd's mood had shifted completely. What had started as a legitimate auction was now feeling like a cruel separation of family members. Rex's loyalty was on full display, and it was becoming impossible to ignore the moral implications of what was happening. Word of the emotional scene began spreading beyond the warehouse as people started recording the interaction on their phones. Social media posts began appearing within minutes, showing Rex's desperate attempts to reach Michael and the old veteran's heartbroken expression as he watched his savings being outbid. "This is going viral," someone in the crowd announced, showing their phone screen. "People are sharing this everywhere." Harrison found himself facing not just a disrupted auction, but a potential public relations nightmare. The videos showing a war veteran being outbid for his service dog were generating angry comments and calls for boycotts of the auction house. Local news stations were already calling, asking for statements about the heartless treatment of military veterans. "We need to handle this carefully," Harrison's assistant whispered urgently. The media attention could be really bad for business, but Harrison was too focused on maintaining his authority to consider the broader implications. "This is a legitimate business transaction," he insisted. Emotion has no place in professional auctions. The crisis forced Michael to confront his own worth and dignity in ways he hadn't experienced since his military service. Standing in that warehouse, watching wealthy strangers bid on his best friend, he realized that his value as a person wasn't determined by the size of his bank account or the opinions of those who looked down on him. "I raise my hand first," Michael said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I offered everything I have. That should count for something." The crowd began to respond to his quiet dignity. Veterans in the audience stepped forward to show support, and even non-military attendees were moved by the obvious depth of the bond between Michael and Rex. "This man served his country," called out a voice from the back. "The least we can do is respect his relationship with his partner." Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the support of a community that recognized his service and sacrifice. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about honor, respect, and the recognition that some bonds transcend commercial transactions. Despite the growing support from the crowd, Harrison remained determined to complete the sale to the highest bidder. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a business to run here. The current high bid is $8,000, and we're going to proceed with the sale." But Rex's behavior was becoming increasingly desperate. The German Shepherd had stopped eating and was showing signs of severe stress that concerned even the auction staff. "The dog's not doing well," one of the handlers reported. "He's been like this since he saw the old man." A veterinarian in the crowd stepped forward. "That dog is showing signs of separation anxiety that could be dangerous to his health. This level of distress isn't normal. It indicates a profound bond that's being traumatized." The crowd's mood grew more tense as they realized they were witnessing not just an emotional reunion, but potentially harmful separation. What had started as a business transaction was becoming something that felt morally wrong, even cruel. "Someone needs to do something," a woman said, her voice carrying the frustration of everyone present. "This isn't right." And then everything begins to fall apart when Rex makes an act that will change everything and force everyone to face their own conscience. At 2:47 p.m., Rex made a decision that would change everything. As Harrison raised his gavel to finalize the sale to the $8,000 bidder, the German Shepherd did something that no one in the room had ever seen before. He began to refuse food, water, and any interaction with the auction staff, his entire body language communicating a level of distress that bordered on dangerous. "The dog won't respond to commands," reported the head handler, his voice tinged with concern. "He's showing signs of severe depression and anxiety. This isn't normal behavior. It's like he's given up." Dr. Sarah Williams, the veterinarian who had spoken up earlier, pushed through the crowd to get closer to Rex's kennel. What she saw alarmed her. This animal is in psychological distress that could become life-threatening. He's exhibiting symptoms of abandonment trauma that I've only seen in cases of severe abuse or separation from primary caregivers. The crowd fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just witnessing a business transaction, they were watching a living being suffer from the forced separation from someone he considered family. Harrison, however, remained unmoved. "This is still a legitimate auction. The dog's emotional state doesn't change the business at hand. We have a high bid of $8,000, and we're going to honor that." But Rex's condition continued to deteriorate. He lay down in his kennel and turned his back to the crowd, his body language clearly communicating defeat and despair. The sight of the proud military working dog in such distress was heartbreaking for everyone present. The decisive moment came when Michael, watching Rex's suffering, made a choice that surprised everyone in the room. Instead of accepting defeat, he stepped forward and addressed the crowd directly. "My name is Michael Bennett," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent warehouse. "I'm a Vietnam veteran, and Rex was my partner for 5 years in the military police. He's not just a dog to me, he's family. He's the reason I get up every morning, the reason I keep fighting when the nightmares get too bad." The crowd listened in respectful silence as Michael continued. "I know I can't outbid you folks with your deep pockets. I've got $3,000 to my name, and that's everything I've saved in 8 years of retirement. But I want you to know what you're buying." He pointed to Rex, who had lifted his head at the sound of Michael's voice. "That dog has served his country with honor. He's detected explosives that could have killed dozens of soldiers. He's protected bases and saved lives. And when he retired, he was thrown away like surplus equipment." Michael's voice grew stronger with emotion. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for justice. This dog earned the right to spend his remaining years with someone who loves him, not someone who sees him as a trophy or an investment." The warehouse was completely silent except for the sound of Rex's soft whining as he recognized his partner's voice. The German Shepherd had moved to the front of his kennel, his eyes fixed on Michael with desperate hope. What happened next would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. The collector, who had bid $8,000, stepped forward, his face showing the internal struggle he was experiencing. "I withdraw my bid," he announced quietly. "This isn't right. The dog belongs with his partner." One by one, the other bidders followed suit. "I withdraw my bid as well," said the dealer who had been driving up the price. "Some things are more important than money." Within minutes, every bidder except Michael had withdrawn from the auction. The crowd began to applaud, and the sound grew into a standing ovation that filled the warehouse with overwhelming emotion. Harrison found himself facing a completely unprecedented situation. "This is highly irregular," he protested. "We can't just change the rules because of sentiment." But the crowd was no longer interested in Harrison's rules. "Take the man's money," someone shouted. "Let him have his dog." The chant was taken up by others. "Let him have his dog. Let him have his dog." Rex, sensing the change in mood, began barking with excitement, his tail wagging as he realized that somehow, impossibly, he might be going home with his beloved partner. This is where everything depends on one final decision, and what happens next will restore faith in human goodness. Harrison faced the most difficult decision of his career as crowd pressure mounted and social media attention continued to grow. The videos of Rex's desperate attempts to reach Michael had been shared thousands of times, and the auction house was receiving calls from news stations, veteran organizations, and angry citizens from across the country. "Sir," his assistant whispered urgently, "we're getting calls from the corporate office. The CEO wants to know how we're handling this situation. The publicity could be really damaging if we're seen as heartless." Harrison looked around the warehouse at the faces of people who had been transformed from customers into witnesses to something profound. The crowd wasn't just supporting Michael, They were demanding justice for a veteran who had served his country and a dog who had earned the right to spend his retirement with someone who loved him. "This is unprecedented," Harrison muttered, but his authority was crumbling under the weight of public opinion and basic human decency. Rex continued to pace in his kennel, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. The German shepherd's body language had transformed from despair to hope, as if he could sense that the tide was turning in their favor. The tension in the warehouse reached its peak as Harrison struggled with his decision. The crowd waited in silence, their collective will focused on one outcome: reuniting Michael with his loyal companion. "I've been running auctions for 20 years, Harrison said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone who recognized that this moment would define his legacy. "I've never seen anything like this." Michael stepped forward, his envelope of life savings trembling in his hands. "Sir, I know it's not the highest bid, but it's everything I have, and I can promise you that Rex will be loved and cared for every day for the rest of his life." The crowd held its breath as Harrison looked from Michael to Rex, then back to the faces of hundreds of people who had been touched by this story of loyalty and love. "Mr. Bennett," Harrison said slowly, "in all my years of conducting auctions, I've never seen a bid that carried more value than money. Your offer represents something that can't be measured in dollars." The silence was deafening as everyone waited for Harrison's final decision. "Sold," Harrison announced, his gavel coming down with finality. "Lot 247 goes to Michael Bennett for $3,000. The warehouse erupted in cheers, applause, and tears as people celebrated the triumph of love over money. Michael stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe that his dream was finally coming true. Then he rushed toward Rex's kennel, his hands shaking as he worked to open the door. The moment Rex was freed, he launched himself into Michael's arms with the force of 5 years of pent-up emotion. The German shepherd's entire body shook with joy as he covered Michael's face with kisses, his tail wagging so hard his entire back end wiggled with excitement. "Hey, boy," Michael whispered through his tears. I'm here, and I'm never leaving you again." Even in his moment of triumph, Michael faced the reality of what lay ahead. Rex was 8 years old, and military working dogs often faced health challenges after years of strenuous service. The veterinary bills alone could quickly overwhelm Michael's limited budget, and he had no safety net beyond his modest pension. "Mr. Bennett," Dr. Williams approached him with a concerned expression. "Rex will need specialized care as he ages. The joint problems, potential PTSD from his service, it's going to be expensive." Michael's joy was tempered by the practical concerns that he had pushed aside in his desperate desire to reunite with Rex. "I'll figure it out," he said, though doubt creased his features. "I'll find a way." The crowd had begun to disperse, but many people lingered, unwilling to let the moment end. Several veterans approached Michael to offer support and share their own stories of the bonds they had formed with military working dogs. "You did something special here today," one veteran told Michael. "You reminded all of us what loyalty really means." The moment that would transform Michael's life came when a woman from the crowd approached him with tears in her eyes. She introduced herself as Jennifer Walsh, a freelance journalist who had been covering the auction for a local newspaper. "Mr. Bennett, I'd like to tell your story," she said. "What happened here today needs to be shared. People need to hear about the bonds between veterans and their service animals and how society treats those who have served. Michael was hesitant at first, but Jennifer's genuine emotion and the crowd's continued support convinced him to share his story. "I've been thinking about this all day," said Tom Rodriguez, a local businessman who had witnessed the entire event. "I want to start a GoFundMe for Mr. Bennett and Rex to help with veterinary expenses and anything else they need." The suggestion was met with immediate enthusiasm from the crowd. People began pulling out their phones, eager to contribute to supporting the veteran and his loyal companion. "This is incredible," Jennifer said, documenting the spontaneous outpouring of support. "I've never seen anything like this. The story is going to touch hearts across the country." Within hours, the GoFundMe page had raised over $5,000, with donations pouring in from people who had seen the videos online and been moved by the story of loyalty and love. The breakthrough came when Rex, despite his age and the stress of the day, began demonstrating his old training routines for Michael. The sight of the German Shepherd performing the exercises they had practiced thousands of times together brought tears to everyone's eyes. "He remembers everything," Michael said with wonder. "After all this time, he remembers our routines." The crowd watched in amazement as Rex went through his paces, sitting, staying, heel work, and even some of the specialized detection work he had been trained for. It was a display of not just the dog's intelligence and training, but of the unbreakable bond between partner and handler. "This is what real partnership looks like," Dr. Williams commented. "The trust, the communication, the mutual respect. It's beautiful." Harrison, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached Michael with an expression of genuine respect. "Mr. Bennett, I owe you an apology. I let business concerns override basic human decency. What you and Rex have is something special." The auction house owner's transformation was complete as he handed Michael an envelope. "The house is donating the entire $3,000 back to you for Rex's care. It's the least we can do." As the warehouse finally began to empty, Michael sat on the floor with Rex pressed against his side, both of them exhausted but happy. The German Shepherd's head rested on Michael's lap, his breathing finally calm and peaceful for the first time in years. "We did it, boy," Michael whispered. "We're going home together." The journalist Jennifer Walsh continued documenting their story, and the GoFundMe campaign had already raised over $15,000 from people around the world who had been touched by their reunion. But the story doesn't end there. What happens next proves that kindness can spread in unexpected ways. Within 24 hours, Michael and Rex's story had gone viral across all social media platforms. The video of their emotional reunion had been viewed over 2 million times, and the GoFundMe campaign had raised over $50,000 from people around the world who were moved by their story of loyalty and love. News outlets from across the country reached out to interview Michael, and their story was featured on national television programs that highlighted the special bonds between veterans and their service animals. Animal welfare organizations praised the story as an example of the importance of keeping working animals with their human partners after retirement. Most importantly, the story sparked a national conversation about how society treats military veterans and their service animals. Legislation was proposed to ensure that retired military working dogs would be offered to their former handlers first before being auctioned to the public. Michael found himself overwhelmed by the generosity of strangers who had been touched by his story and wanted to help ensure that Rex received the best possible care in his retirement years. The Rex and Michael story, as it became known, led to significant changes in how military working dogs were handled after their retirement. The Department of Defense implemented new policies prioritizing placement with former handlers, and funding was allocated to support veterinary care for retired service animals. The story inspired the creation of the Loyal Companion Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to reuniting military working dogs with their handlers and providing support for their care. Michael became a spokesperson for the foundation, sharing his story at events across the country. The GoFundMe campaign ultimately raised over $200,000, allowing Michael to move to a home with a yard where Rex could enjoy his retirement comfortably. The surplus funds were used to help other veterans reunite with their service animals and provide ongoing veterinary care. Jennifer Walsh's article about the auction won a Pulitzer Prize for feature writing, and she used her platform to continue advocating for military working dogs and their handlers. The story became a case study in journalism schools about the power of storytelling to create positive social change. Michael's life was transformed not just by Rex's return, but by the outpouring of support from people around the world. The isolation and depression that had plagued him for years began to lift as he found purpose in advocating for other veterans and their service animals. "Rex saved my life twice," Michael often said in interviews, "once during our service together and again when his loyalty reminded me that I was worth fighting for." The bond between Michael and Rex deepened during their retirement years as they traveled together, sharing their story and helping other veterans find the support they needed. Their story became a powerful reminder that loyalty, love, and the bonds formed through shared service transcend monetary value. It proved that sometimes the most important things in life cannot be bought or sold. They can only be earned through dedication, sacrifice, and unconditional love. True loyalty cannot be bought or sold. It can only be earned through the countless moments of trust, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion that define the bonds between those who serve together.